I want a sense that I would like for people to be able to feel present with their worries and their concerns, and that's so annoying. So many voices in here. These flies, get me out of here, I'm leaving. That's all welcome listening to me.
Yes, perhaps in defense of my mode of listening. No, I being sarcastic, really. I guess one reason I find it interesting for me is it allows me to draw a relation between the scored elements and what happens in the space and the sonic material, which of course is not necessary, but that seems to me to be something that can be very interesting to understand what we're hearing in all this material. That's all I'd offer as my defense.
Well, no, I mean, I think, again, there's reasons for the visuals that are present. In the projection, we only offer subtitles for what's going on. So there's a violin, it'll say violin. It's being pizzicato, it'll say pizzicato. And there's a couple little funny things in there that maybe a little bit more loose and metaphorical, but quite most of it is in fact very concrete. What I write on the mirror, I perform in a concrete way. So being able to read that connection is a wonderful thing, and I suppose can give one a lot. I don't know that discerning that and discerning it accurately, being like, oh, Ethan is performing this, which it says over there at this time, everything's kosher. That's great, but that not knowing that might get you elsewhere with the listening. And I guess I'm just very open to that possibility. And I do wish to manipulate sound in the room, but not so much how one listens necessarily.
Just to close off that thought, and then it's all yours. I guess I've always, when music is presented in this kind of way, musical notation in particular, I've always thought it kind of reads like this kind of secret language that if you study music, you kind of have this access to, and if you don't, it's like it's mysterious and kind of interesting in a very different way. So yes, I don't suppose that I have special access via that, but I've got particular kind of access. Yeah.
And also interest, I guess. Yeah.
Indeed.
I really like hearing you talk about listening like that and the language around listening. And yeah, you've mentioned sensual listening, and you talked about seduction a little bit earlier in the chat. And I guess from Samuel's question, talk about listenership, which kind of brings us in a way to these concepts of reciprocity and mutuality, which appear in all of the text that you can read around the exhibition. And so out of that, I wonder if you could talk about collaboration, because there are a lot of people also who've been involved, as well as Lena, in this putting together of the show, and how you mentioned a little bit before that in musical spaces we don't talk about collaboration so much. I wonder if you could speak to how you think about collaboration, and not in ideals of what your ideal collaboration is, but you're saying it's about mood. Who comes? Are people depressed? Are they in a good mood? Are they, that kind of adds to the glitch, but it also adds to the mode of collaborative listening. So yeah, I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. Well, the collaboration is really just I almost find the word unnecessary. It's just so basic to what I do and how I'm working, whether I am working with musicians or a sculptural artist or an artist working in any medium, whatever it may be. It's always a question of finding what works. And what works is not about me. It's not the question of it being about the composer, about the composer's voice. I mean, these are things that maybe people in other disciplines don't have these kinds of issues in the same way. Maybe it articulates itself differently, but for composers, it's always this thing of, you gotta find your voice.
Yes, and there's a lot about authorship
Right.
and that kind of thing. And
Right.
I'm interested in collaboration as a way of giving up my authorship and sharing it with someone else. And so, yeah, that's also why I'm interested.
I mean, it goes back a long way. It should be mentioned that Bach had about 20 children, most of whom were very literate in music and were doing most of the copywork, if not all of it. And even if you just checking out, I mean, there are endless artistic practitioners going all the way back in European practices for sure, and sort of elsewhere, that involved a large studio of people, but somebody gets the name. I mean, that's a constant thing. I mean, I dare say it, my ego gets a little bit, gives a little bit of side eye sometimes when my name is under something. If I did a ballet with the director. In Europe, the director always goes first. In America, the composer always goes first. So these dynamics are always playing out, but that's also part of collaboration. Those tendencies, and I think that it produces more interesting work. It moves outside of established discourses and moves into the risky place of being willing to be open to what someone else thinks, wants, or needs, in particular needs. I think the phrase came up at some point, boundaries save lives, in our building up of the show, and I think that's really important and requires people to do that together, I think. And I mean, definitely Sam and I were speaking about it. You were saying, if you don't mind sharing this, you were saying, and I like my alone time in the studio, and I think that I also need that. I assure you I spent a great many hours completely alone. And at a certain point, for me, in my experience, I just get into these spirals, and I just really need other people around. Not a question of validation so much, or maybe it is, by the question of being seen. So it's actually also very important to me. I'm being seen by someone else. We're actually doing something together. This is not simply a product of my spirals in my studio when I'm a little stoned, but they're actually something that's in conversation with someone else that someone else can read in a very different way. So with Lena, who has, we've worked together and lived together and parented together and loved together and many other things together for several years, we have a certain rapport and a certain conversation going. And with my other collaborators, I could name several: Adam Linder, Isabel Lewis, Ariel Bell, Sharon Masha, Dorota Farm. All these artists are artists with whom I've worked a lot, and I've learned so much by opening myself out to what their practice is, and I don't even know. It's also like coming over here at Aotearoa. I don't know this place. I don't know the discourse here. And like in this collaboration with Ruth, I'm getting to the opportunity to be humbled by the fact that there's more than me. And I think that that's a really essential part of collaboration. And I think that that's essential to the feeling for me that I get from collaboration, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a few more questions. Is that?
Is everybody okay? Great.
I have two questions. One which is, I guess I've got to choose one of them. You can do both. Let's start with time. I'm just thinking about the title of the show. Intimation of endless space given in a small window of time, approximately 10 minutes. There's lots of kind of flashing time signals there. There's both endless space, a small window, and then very specifically 10 minutes. And I'm wondering, there's a suggestion of kind of open possibility, as well as quite a bit of constraint within that. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what those different ways of thinking about time are doing for us.
Deep dive. I would say, that text, it's the tempo indication that I gave in an orchestral piece, the one that played at Carnegie Hall, that was like in 2017.
They would have hated that as a tempo direction.
Hated it. Could not do it. I think intimacy is hard for classical musicians. But I think the question of intimacy is very important here, partly due to, in several ways, the relationship between Lena and Ruth, between me and Ruth, knowing Ruth through Lena, between me and Lena, the three of us. With Simon, we have a bi-weekly jour fix. I never got out of my calendars weekly. It's still going, by the way. But anyway, so there are all these. There are these long-standing relationships that are coming into the practice of building the work that are intimate, and so I guess that's a durational thing and a question, and it addresses the intimacy. I would leave it there. And the space, I guess, the nice thing about this calendar is that it produces endless possibilities. It has its limits. It has a certain space of harmony, I would say, and a certain kind of a certain shape to the sound across the 15 pieces, but they occur in so many different configurations that I think it would be rather impossible to hear them all. So it is, there is a kind of endlessness there. And I've always been attracted to that, how music can feel like a little object, a little thing that you put over there, and then you put another one over here, and then you move them around. And this is a contrapuntal practice, right? Putting this thing there and that thing there. Counterpoint is the word, polyphony, that I think I didn't say before, that I would say now. And that counterpoint, as it's changing and shifting, is producing endless possibilities. None of the pieces, except for this recording of my neighborhood from a bench that goes on here, aside from that, none of the pieces is longer than 10 minutes. So that's the approximately 10 minutes. What else is in the title? Small window of time. Yeah. But I mean, you come into a show like this, you come in, you check it out, you get a phone call, you leave. You know, I mean, that happens to me very often. I come in, I have to sit and wait for a durational show. Oh, okay, no, you know what, I'm into it. And then like 20 minutes later, I move along. You know, it's a small window of time that you come in and experience a show like this, and that's cool. That's cool. And what you experience in there is entirely different than what somebody experienced yesterday. And also, as this calendar is a rather malleable little thing, though I do make mistakes sometimes, I change the show constantly. I'm constantly adding little things. I have these cats that I really like to add in sometimes, and these little coin flips, and it's something that I get to do intuitively while I'm here and be present with the work. And then when I leave, I let go, because I can't touch it anymore. So it's also a question of my intimacy with the sound, I guess. What was the other question? Do we have time for one more?
We could pivot out and then come back. Should we do that?
Pivot out and come back.
Well, there might be
Yeah,
more interesting questions.
Did you want to ask something? Yeah.
Was there a question from the floor at this stage? Yes.
Hi, I'll yell. I wanted to ask something about maintenance, and you kind of like talk about maintenance and the small tweaks and adjusting to the things and sounds that come into the space. Is there also a type of maintenance that is resistant to the new introductions? Is there that creating a kind of more tension? Is there a space in maintenance for that?
No, thanks for that. That's exactly what I'm working with when I'm doing the maintenance work. Like sometimes I'm just on something and I'm keeping it chugging along, and whatever happens, I'm gonna chug along. I'm just gonna keep on moving, keep on moving, keep on moving, whatever happens. And that consistency then pushes against this endless moving around in different configurations, right? So that's exactly where the fun is. There's a word for that, a musical term for alto nerds that probably know it anyway. It's dissonance. The word dissonance. You push into a dissonance. I always tell this to musicians, like, just get into it. Just get right into it. And then come out. And you'll be fine. It's like surfing a wave, you know? There's a little bit of a lift to that. It creates a kinetic energy. No, I mean that seriously. The maintenance is really getting my hands on it in the sense that, okay, it's pushing up. Well, I'll push back, or it's pushing up and I'll receive, or like there's different ways, or it's not listening, it's actually never listening to me. It never listens, whatever I do, it never listens to me. So I don't know, that's what I would say to that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Right. I've got a question about your relationship with temporality and polyphony. Do you think of polyphony in terms of linear
think about it a bit differently, or I phrase it differently. I mean, I hear you. I don't. I think that for me, like writing Bach chorale in that style, there's a technique to it. There's a certain skill. It's like doing Sudoku. You learn how to, which I cannot do. I'm terrible across control and chess and all those things. But it is a little bit like that, where I always think of it a little bit like that. And that's a kind of technique for a very specific circumstance, right? There's other kinds of circumstances which require different kind of techniques, some of which I have no technique for it. And coming back to collaboration, that's where collaboration comes to be interested. And that's rather non-linear, it's just relationship with people. You know, and it might be like, oh, okay, I should write, I'm working on a show right now, and they like really want to waltz in the style of Strauss, and I really don't want to learn how to do that. But I mean, maybe I have to. You know, so that's not something I planned, so that's not linear, if you know what I mean.
Hi. This is probably a really basic question, but it's sort of related a little bit to what Samuel was saying about the fact that I think Samuel mentioned notation, and there's a sort of there's a mystical or a magical kind of component to that. But it feels like, and I guess that like in relation to the bigger question, is language enough? Like a lot of what we're seeing here seems to start with musical notation, and there's a translation of that. You know, so there's an onomatopoeic kind of moment. The mirror work and the work behind you is still rooted within the musical notation. And I'm just wondering whether that is enough, because sometimes people who don't read music need something else.
Well, there's an emoji of a lung right there. So that's for breath. Yeah, that's how I read those. You know, just remember. Here's Cat in the Hat's hand. Some of you might have read Cat in the Hat at some point. This is a coin flip. This is a And here's the emoji for So actually, I think the language is rather present. And I think the language is rather clear. I mean, I think that Lena's done an excellent job of being very concrete about it. The words, of course, on the floor are, yes, coming from Italian, problematic, maybe, poco a poco. But then there's some English, also problematic, staggering, breathe, hold, and move freely. Over here, it's only text. And the mirror could be anything. I felt a little bit notey yesterday, so I gave that. But there are instructions there that are written in English. So for those who can read it, I think that it's legible. And here are only it's images of hands. There is no standard notation being used. I do come from that practice, and I work with that. And Lena finds that interesting. And there's definitely a question of the score of fetish in the world of composers. Some people really love a very complicated looking thing, let me tell you. And there's a joy in that and a pleasure in that some people get that I don't necessarily. But Lena, as a graphic designer and as a bookmaker, her work is entirely around the placement of things and the rhythm of things on page, the composition of them across a book, across a wall, you know. So there is a lot of questions of visual communication that rather exceed musical notation that I would just invite you to encounter.